Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 161, Ultimate Vexation appears. It wasn't just Xianxia whose attention turned to Meng Hao. Xu Yudao and the grey-robed cultivator also gave him deep, meaningful looks. His expression was calm, but inwardly, his mind flashed with understanding. Now he knew why everyone had looked at him so strangely when they had entered the large cauldron. The 9 great names didn't include Meng, so once he entered, they must all have reached the conclusion that he was using an assumed name. Even he was a bit uncertain regarding this revelation. He looked through the sheets of lightning toward the 9 massive statues. Sure enough, amongst them could be found faces similar to Xu Yudao, the grey-robed cultivator, and even Xianxia. These statues depicted their ancestors. They had surnames which could be traced back to ancient times, clans which some people called the 9 great families. Am I of the 9 great families? Meng Hao asked himself. Moments later, a smile appeared on his face, although it was a bit cold. He was sure that he was not of the 9 great families. He had remembered how upon entering the enormous cauldron, the copper mirror had grown hot within the bag of the cosmos. If that was all, it wouldn't be enough evidence to prove anything. But Meng Hao had also suddenly recalled how the mirror had grown hot during the secret meeting, when Han Bei had produced the information regarding the first volume of the Classic of Time. Han Bei must have prepared for this day for a long time, he thought, and it wasn't just one secret meeting she attended. The information she sent out was not restricted just to late foundation stage cultivators, but more importantly, to only bloodline members of the 9 great families. With all this scattered information, he came to the conclusion that it must have something to do with the copper mirror. Just what is this mirror exactly? It can agitate the auras of wild beasts to explode, it has an astonishing power of duplication, and apparently has helped me achieve my goals by using underhanded means. Even though I'm not of the 9 great families, I was still able to enter this place. All these various thoughts flashed through Meng Hao's mind in quick succession. Only a moment or two passed between Xianxia's question and Meng Hao's response. Whether or not the 9 great families include Meng, I don't really know, he said coolly. But the fact that I entered the cauldron and made it to this point raises a very important issue. The look on his face made it very clear what he was thinking. Xianxia's eyes flickered, and he furrowed his brow. Meng Hao's words left him speechless. The words were a defense in themselves, even though he neither admitted nor denied anything, or perhaps he had done both. Xianxia looked at him for a long moment. The response had been clear. Meng Hao didn't know. But maybe the reason he was here was because he was indeed of the 9 great families. Fellow Daoist Meng provided you with his answer, said Han Bei calmly. Elder brother Xie, I know that you have some green cloaking pills on your person that the sect leader gave you specifically for use in this place. I know this already, there's no need for you to confirm or deny it. Xianxia was quiet for a moment. He looked around at the lightning, his face somber. Then he slapped the top of his head and spit out a small green pill the size of a fingernail. As soon as it flew out, it exploded, sending large amounts of green qi out in all directions. As it did, the lightning began to grow slightly transparent, as if they were being cloaked. The 5 of them continued onward several hundreds of meters, with Xu Yudao and the grey-robed cultivator taking the lead. 100 meters later, Xianxia, his face grim, said, I only have 3 green cloaking pills. He spat out another pill, and they raced forward amidst the indistinct lightning. With the power of the 2 green cloaking pills, they were able to reach the location of the 9 statues. The statues were awe-inspiring, as was the cauldron in their center, which seemed as if it could contain the heavens. An ancient aura circled about the area, brushing against their faces and making them feel as if they had traveled back to a primordial time. It was like they could feel the boundlessness of that era. Han Bei was incapable of concealing the excitement within her eyes. She panted as she looked up at the statue of her ancestor. Next to her, Xu Yudao, the grey-cloaked man, and even Xianxia stood by silently, all of them gazing at the statues of their respective ancestors. Meng Hao had no way to comprehend what was going through their minds. His face was the calmest of the bunch as he looked at the statues one by one. Finally, his gaze fell upon the circular cauldron that represented the heavens. Even as he looked at the cauldron, something in his peripheral vision caught his attention. Something was moving on one of the statues. Meng Hao's eyes immediately darted over, and then opened wide. There, upon the shoulder of the statue that resembled the grey-cloaked cultivator, some dust had fallen away to reveal something. It was square, and looked gelatinous and somewhat elastic, like a slab of meat jelly. It was pure and white, and after looking upon it, the first reaction of most people would be to try to eat it. The object sat on the statue's shoulder, wriggling a bit, causing more dust to fall down. Meng Hao stared, eyes wide, mouth agape. The thing seemed to be alive. Suddenly, it flew off of the statue's shoulder and onto its head. Then it leaped up into the air. A crack appeared on the surface of the meat jelly, which opened up into an enormous mouth. Instantly, the lightning in the sky crackled. 10 lightning bolts fell down directly onto the meat jelly. It chewed for a bit, then stopped, as if it were digesting the lightning. Meng Hao gaped in astonishment as it dropped to the ground and then hopped over to land on the circular cauldron. It remained there motionless. It wasn't just Meng Hao who saw this happen. The noise caused by the lightning and the meat jelly was incredible, causing Han Bei and the others to all look over. Han Bei's eyes narrowed, whereas Xianxia's opened wider. He gasped, and the two of them exchanged a shocked, knowing glance. "That's," the grey-robed cultivator suddenly said, "that must be what the Black Sieve sect needs the 100 Spirits Tower for. They want to drag out ultimate vexation." A mysterious look appeared in his eyes. Within his pupils appeared magical symbols as he attempted to gain information. This had nothing to do with his cultivation base, but something specific to his eyes. Before Han Bei and Xianxia could say anything, the meat jelly suddenly jumped up. The face of an old man, his eyes closed, magically appeared on its surface. His nose twitched, and his eyes opened. They appeared to be filled with frustration. The meat jelly suddenly flew up and shot toward the exit of the square cauldron. But then it stopped in midair, as if it were hesitating. It floated there for a moment and consumed more lightning. Seeing this, the eyes of the 5 cultivators gleamed. "Why is this thing called ultimate vexation?" Meng Hao suddenly asked of the grey-robed cultivator. "Even I don't know," was the reply. "I haven't been able to uncover any information about its origin. The Black Sieve sect has likely spent much more time researching it. The little I do know is that as long as it has existed, it has been called ultimate vexation." "I couldn't care less what that thing is called," said Xu Yudao. "Half an hour has already passed. If fellow Daoist can't retrieve the rest of the Classic of Time soon, then our whole trip here will have been a waste." Without a word, Han Bei sat down cross-legged beneath the statue of her ancestor. Her hands made incantation gestures, and her ancient jade began to emit a greenish glow as it rotated around her. Meng Hao's eyes glittered and he stepped a bit closer to her. Everything around them was relatively quiet. Only the claps of thunder roared out. Time passed, the space of roughly 100 breaths. Han Bei's eyes suddenly opened, and the sound of incantation words floated from her mouth. Xu Yudao, the grey-robed cultivator, and Xianxia all stood around, as vigilant as ever. Suddenly, the sound of Han Bei's incantation ceased, and she spat out a mouthful of blood onto the ancient jade. It emitted a blinding green light and flew toward the hands of the statue. It didn't move incredibly fast, and actually wobbled back and forth a bit in the air as it moved. The blood drained from Han Bei's face, as if she were having trouble controlling it. As the jade neared the statue, the 2 scripture scrolls in the statue's hands began to glow brightly. Cracks appeared on their surfaces, and a boom echoed out. Suddenly, 2 pieces of jade exploded out from within the 2 scrolls. Everyone clearly saw this happen, and though they might have their suspicions as to what was happening, it was obvious that 2 pieces of jade were flying away from the exploded scripture scrolls. Whistling sounds echoed out from them as they shot out. The 2 jade pieces flew out, seemingly completely out of control, not controlled by anything or anyone. They seemed to be shooting out in an attempt to leave the square cauldron. Before they could go very far, though, they were grabbed by the greenish glow emanated from Han Bei's ancient jade. It was as if they were all connected somehow. The two escaping pieces of jade suddenly stopped in midair. They began to shake, as if they were struggling. A loud buzzing sound emanated out from them. Han Bei coughed up some blood, and immediately seemed to grow listless. Exhaustion covered her face, and suddenly, her ancient piece of jade slipped out of her control and fell toward the ground. In that instant, the other two pieces of jade suddenly began to fly off into the distance. It was very sudden, and there was no time for anyone to think. Xu Yudao's eyes flickered, and his body shot up into the air as he flew toward one of the jade pieces. The grey-robed man's eyes narrowed, but he too stepped up and shot forward, a green beam of light that shot toward the second jade piece. As for Xianxia, he flew up and toward the original jade piece, a look of suspicion on his face. "No fighting, fellow Taoists," cried Han Bei. "Great tribulation will come on anyone not of my bloodline who touches those items. I have a method to bring together the three ancient pieces of jade." She coughed up some more blood. Chapter 162. Crafty schemes. Her words were essentially meaningless. Xu Yudao increased his speed. 3 people, 3 different directions. They sped forward, their lightning-repelling items glittering. They flew forward in the twinkling of an eye. Meng Hao also took action. However, he didn't rush in pursuit of the jades. Instead, he headed toward Han Bei, who seemingly had lost control over her own ancient jade. At the same time Xu Yudao reached the jade he had been pursuing. He flicked his sleeve, collecting it into his bag of holding. Throughout the process, he avoided any dangers whatsoever. "Ha ha ha. Fellow Daoist Han, I've retrieved the item for you. I'll keep it with me for now and give you a copy later." At the same time as his laughter rang out, Xiejie's eyes suddenly glittered brightly. Anyone looking at him would see the same suspicions that existed moments before on his face. However, Han Bei was not faking. The anxiety and enmity on her face after all the coughing up of blood were real. And yet, Xu Yudao had succeeded. Xiejie seemed to no longer suspect anything. He increased his speed. As he shot forward, a lightning bolt descended toward him. He spat a third green cloaking pill out of his mouth. A boom sounded out as the pill activated, completely concealing Xiejie from any lightning. He bit his tongue, spitting out some blood that turned into a blood mist. As he passed through it, his speed increased dramatically. In an instant, he was upon the piece of jade. With the flick of a sleeve, he collected it into his bag of holding. Xiejie's eyes burned as he glanced toward the grey-robed cultivator. He was rocketing forward, seemingly focused on pursuing the jade piece, but doing so with caution. Having seen Xu Yudao and Xiejie's successes, he increased his speed, and within a moment was almost in the position to acquire the last piece of jade. All eyes were focused on him. Meng Hao watched him flick his sleeve to gather up the piece of jade. Suddenly, for some inexplicable reason, the lightning in the area began to accumulate. In the blink of an eye, 10 bolts of lightning shot down. The grey-robed cultivator's lightning-repelling treasure was simply incapable of resisting, and shattered. His face fell, and he was just about to do everything in his power to evade, when a shocking thunderclap sounded out. Everyone watched as the man's body was transformed into bits of floating ash. Even his bag of holding was destroyed. Only the ancient jade remained, floating beneath the lightning, undamaged. Bits of ash and bone, the remnants of the grey-robed cultivator, slowly drifted down to the ground. Han Bei coughed up some more blood. Her face was pale, but she gritted her teeth and raised her trembling hands toward the drifting piece of jade. It shook, then changed directions, shooting back toward Han Bei and Meng Hao. Based on its trajectory, it seemed it was actually heading toward Meng Hao. "Fellow Daoist Meng, be careful," shouted Han Bei shrilly. Everything was happening too quickly. Seeing the death of the grey-robed cultivator caused Xiejie's expression to change. A horrified look appeared on Xu Yudao's face. However, at the moment, both of them were looking at the piece of jade that was descending toward Meng Hao and Han Bei. The death of the grey-robed cultivator seemed to have been an accident that had nothing to do with the ancient jade. The two of them flew forward simultaneously. From the look of it, if Meng Hao attempted to interfere, they would join forces to destroy him. However, their speed was a bit slower than his. Even moving as fast as possible, it seemed that they would arrive a moment too late. Meng Hao, eyes glittering, shot forward, a barely perceptible mocking smile forming on the corner of his mouth. The three of them closed in on the piece of jade. It was at this moment that the closed eyes of the meat jelly floating in the mid-air suddenly opened. It caught sight of the three people flying toward the jade, and suddenly it shot forward with indescribable speed. In a flash, it landed on Xu Yudao's head. Xu Yudao's body shook, and a look of astonishment appeared on his head. "Fellow Xianxia, help me." Before Xianxia could even react to his words, the meat jelly opened its mouth. Suddenly, massive amounts of lightning bore down. It seemed as if they were entering the mouth of the meat jelly. But by the time they disappeared, Xu Yudao's body was nothing more than ash in the wind. He didn't even have time to scream. Xianxia gasped, and his face flickered. He suddenly stopped moving, his heart pounding. He stared in astonishment at the floating meat jelly. His scalp began to go numb. Without Xu Yudao and Xianxia pursuing the ancient piece of jade, it quickly arrived at Meng Hao. He chuckled, shooting forward, and then actually moving out of the path of the piece of jade. Now, it was heading directly toward Han Bei. She gaped in shock, as did Xianxia, who was still reeling from the actions of the meat jelly moments ago. Meng Hao laughed, looking back and forth between Han Bei and Xianxia. "Your act could fool grey robes, but did you really think you could fool me?" A look of ridicule appeared in his eyes. He spit out the lightning flag. The surrounding lightning was instantly thrown into chaos. Hearing Meng Hao's words, Han Bei frowned and Xianxia's eyes flashed. They said nothing. The appearance of that meat jelly was not something you anticipated, and therefore Xu Yudao lost his life. That was an accident, not part of your scheming. In any case, he continued coldly, with Xu Yudao gone, your three-person plan cannot be completed. I think now you should consider allowing me to take his place, assuming I wish to. He smiled. The lightning flag next to him sent out ripples, causing the surrounding lightning to roil even more violently. Not wanting to attract the attention of the meat jelly, he pulled the lightning flag close to him and suppressed the rippling. An unsightly expression covered Xianxia's face. Meng Hao's craftiness left him awestruck. During their entire journey, he had barely interacted at all with Han Bei and Xu Yudao. He'd assumed no one could possibly connect the three of them together. And yet Meng Hao had. "It was Xu Yudao's final words that made it clear to you," said Han Bei with a little smile. "Fellow Daoist Meng, you are very perceptive. I can't help but admire you in this." There didn't seem to be any anxiety on her face whatsoever. "It's true. There can only be three people in the end. I'll be honest with you, fellow Daoist. I've betrayed the Black Sieve sect because of this place. Originally Xianxia and I received authorization from the sect to come here. Unfortunately, we never imagined that the object the sect sought, ultimate vexation, would be here. And we never predicted that Xu Yudao would fall." She straightened her hair and smiled. Despite her beauty, he had been careful of her machinations from the beginning. She was clever, but Xianxia couldn't compare at all. As she spoke, Han Bei lifted her hand and made a grasping motion. A blue streak of light shot toward her from the position where Xu Yudao had been killed. Moments later, a grey streak appeared from where the grey-robed cultivator had died. They circled around in the air. As they did, Han Bei opened her mouth and spit out a yellow strand. The three strands intertwined and began to emit a bright light. The yellow strand was obviously from the Li woman, which Han Bei had somehow retrieved after her death. In this place of treasures of the 9 great families, only the Han clan treasure can be retrieved. The rest of the statues have not been damaged, and are therefore still sealed. We originally needed strands from 3 bloodlines, and power from 3 people, to be able to open the true location of the time-refining treasure of the Han clan. Now, we have no choice other than to use Xu Yudao's strand. "Brother Meng," she said earnestly, "let's not bring up everything from before. I hope we can agree on that. If you agree, then you can have your copy of the time-refining treasure. I'm willing to swear an oath on the name of my illustrious ancestors." She slapped her bag of holding to produce a feng shui compass. She quickly erased the branding inside of it. "This object," she said, "can serve as an expression of my apology. Actually, the exit I spoke of earlier is not really an exit. That place will only return you here. This feng shui compass is a sect treasure. You can use it to get out of this place. However, it won't take you out of the blessed land, it will merely take you out of the square cauldron." The feng shui compass floated over to Meng Hao. He eyed it expressionlessly, casting his spiritual sense into it for a moment. Then he exchanged a glance with Han Bei. Their eyes glittered simultaneously. Xianxia looked at them, his face grim. He let out a cold snort. Meng Hao took the feng shui compass, his expression the same as usual. He examined it further with spiritual sense. After confirming that it was a teleportation device, he nodded. Han Bei's smile grew even more beautiful. She gave Meng Hao a slight bow, then looked over at Xianxia, who was glaring at Meng Hao. He made no attempt to hide his displeasure. He and Han Bei had been a couple for some time. Once their mission here was completed, they were to return to the sect and be officially united as beloved. Han Bei took a deep breath and then waved her beautiful hand. The three-colored strands interlocked and flew out. They grew longer, creating a complex pattern which then shot toward the statue of the Han ancestor and into the crack on its back. At the same time, Han Bei bit her tongue and then spit out some blood. The three strands turned bright red and continued to stream into the crack. Next, the strands separated. Han Bei grabbed one, and the other two shot toward Meng Hao and Xianxia respectively. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as he grabbed the strand. As soon as he touched it, he felt the copper mirror growing hot within the bag of the cosmos. The objects held aloft by the 9 statues are not real. They are mere illusions. The true treasures are inside the circular cauldron. No one can take them, not even someone of one of the 9 bloodlines. However, the body of the Han ancestor was struck with tribulation lightning, and was cracked. Therefore, the time-refining treasure within the cauldron is the only of the 9 that can be acquired. The only way to get it is to break open the circular cauldron. With our cultivation bases, that would be impossible. Brother Meng. Xie, dear. Please bolster the power of my bloodline. We will use the power of the ancestor statue to retrieve the item. Her eyes glowed mysteriously as she looked at Meng Hao and Xianxia, a sweet smile on her face. Chapter 163. Tender killing. A roaring sound filled the world within the cauldron. The lightning in the region danced about, and the meat jelly seemed to have been frightened. Its attention now appeared to be fixed upon Meng Hao and the others. Han Bei's voice rang out. "I shall now employ my bloodline magic. Brother Meng and Xie, dear, please assist me with all your power." She bit her tongue, spitting more blood out onto the strands that wound into the crack on the statue. It began to emit a red glow. A droning roar sounded out, and the entire statue began to tremble. Vast quantities of dust poured off of it. Meng Hao suddenly felt as if the strand in his hand was pulling at his cultivation base, as well as his spiritual sense. His eyes flickered, but his face remained still. Next to him, Xianxia's eyes glittered brightly as he poured power from his cultivation base, as well as spiritual sense, into the strand he held. He looked at Meng Hao, killing intent flickering within his eyes. Then his gaze shifted to Han Bei, and his gaze grew warm. It could be said that the two of them were a green plum and a bamboo horse, childhood sweethearts. When they were young, there had been some conflict between them, but as of now, it seemed that Han Bei really had worked her way into his heart. Suddenly, the roaring grew in intensity. Han Bei's face grew pale. She was in control of the 3 threads. Xianxia and Meng Hao were simply providing the assisting power with their cultivation bases and spiritual sense. They had no way to do anything to cause the statue to do anything. They poured their power in, while Han Bei employed the power of her bloodline. Using her bloodline to touch the spirit of the ancestor statue was magic that only she could perform. If anyone else tried to touch the statue's spirit, their cultivation base would wither up. It was something that neither Meng Hao nor Xianxia could do. About 10 breaths worth of time passed. Booming sounds filled the sky. Suddenly the kneeling statue emitted a roar as its eyes suddenly began to shine, as if it were alive. Its body slowly began quiver, as if it were preparing to stand. Han Bei's face grew paler, her eyes brighter. She spat out more blood, causing her blood qi to enter into the statue. The whole statue trembled violently, as if an earthquake was shaking it. Then, the massive statue stood up. Its eyes emitted a dull glow, and a mysterious pressure filled the entire area. It slowly lowered its hands. As Meng Hao watched, the images were burned indelibly into his memory. He took a deep breath, continuing to provide cultivation-based power and spiritual sense. Han Bei's body shook. This was real trembling, not an act. Her face was as pale as a corpse's. But determination radiated out of her eyes, and she spat out more blood. Boom! The statue slowly outstretched its right hand, pointing with its index finger. The finger seemed to be filled with an indescribable power. It descended toward the circular cauldron situated in the middle of the 9 statues. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed and gleamed mysteriously. "I need more power," said Han Bei, her voice urgent. Without hesitation, Xianxia poured more power into the strand he held. Meng Hao's eyes shined as he did the same. Some of the color returned to Han Bei's face, but moments later she spat out more blood, filling the statue with more power. Its finger continued to approach the cauldron. It seemed the cauldron would open at any moment. At this exact time, however, the descending finger suddenly changed directions. It no longer headed toward the circular cauldron, but toward Xianxia. It moved with incredible speed, causing a look of complete shock to cover his face. "Han Bei, what are you doing?" cried Xianxia, throwing the strand away from himself. His eyes filled with intense terror, and he shot backward. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. He opened his mouth, and the lightning mist flew out, preventing Xianxia from moving backward. His body stopped moving. His words were still echoing out by the time the massive finger reached him. The finger barely touched him, and his entire body exploded with a bang, even his Dao pillar. In an instant, everything disintegrated. His life was completely gone. He didn't let out a blood-curdling scream, only a furious roar that lingered on after his death. An orange strand curled up where his body used to be, which then entered the statue's finger. His bag of holding rose up and flew over to Han Bei. She grabbed it and immediately produced a small black vial. She crushed it, and a phantom figure floated up that looked in every way exactly like Han Bei. She absorbed it in through her ears, mouth, and nose. All of this takes some time to describe, but actually happened in space of only a few breaths. Meng Hao watched everything with the same expression as always, as if he had been expecting it to happen. He was completely expressionless, although his eyes flickered. "Many thanks for your assistance, fellow Daoist Meng," said Han Bei with a sweet smile. She bowed slightly toward him. "Fellow Daoist Han, it was a clever move to exterminate your dear Xie," he said coolly. He was not surprised, because the violet feng shui compass she had given him now was not just unbranded, it also contained a message. In the message, she had directly told him that she planned to kill Xianxia, and when it happened, he shouldn't be alarmed. "When the Black Civ sect captured me and my clansmen, it seemed as if they would treat us well. But in actuality, we were nothing more than animals in a cage. Xianxia was the worst. He treated me horribly since childhood. After we grew up, he had further desires. It's only natural for me to slay him. If I hadn't, then everything we acquired today would belong to the Black Civ sect. Now, we can share everything between the two of us." She smiled at him and said, "Brother Meng is surpassingly astute, I don't dare to attempt to deceive you. That is why I left the message on the feng shui compass. I always accomplish what I set out to do. Today, the time refinement technique will become ours. From now on, you don't need to do anything more." Her expression was sincere, although she sighed inwardly. Of the 6 people who had begun the mission, all had their own thoughts and plans. Only Meng Hao had seen through everything and come through it all. People had fallen around him, but he remained unscathed. This caused fear to grow in Han Bei's heart, as well as admiration. Had any mistakes been made along the way, Meng Hao would have been dead. Because of this, she was subconsciously afraid of provoking him. Therefore, her words were actually true, and revealed her true intentions. Meng Hao's expression was the same as ever. He said nothing, just simply nodded. However, the lightning mist surrounded him. If Han Bei did anything threatening, he would call down the lightning. Death would be assured. Han Bei took a deep breath and looked at him. She abandoned any last bit of scheming. The journey here had been difficult, and she had used up all her tricks. She really did not want to meet any more mishaps. Her hand flickered an incantation, and the massive statue shook, then began to reach back toward the circular cauldron. When it touched it, the entire world within the square cauldron shook. The lid of the circular cauldron slowly tilted up, and a violet qi began to pour out of it. Inside, Meng Hao caught a glimpse of 3 jade pages floating up. Their appearance seemed to coincide with that of the violet qi, and they hadn't completely emerged from the cauldron, as if they might sink back in at any time. Han Bei's eyes filled with a bright glow, and she gasped. Her right hand slapped her bag of holding, and a small clay jar appeared, about the size of a person's head. It flew up into the air, transforming into a beam of light that shot toward the circular cauldron. As it neared, cracks spread out across its surface and it exploded, sending the ash that had been inside shooting forward. Within the ash were what appeared to be 10 phantom images. There were men and women, and their ages varied, but they all resembled each other. These must be clan members of the same bloodline. This was not just random ash, it was ash collected upon the cremation of various Han clan members, and contained life force. The figures spread out, and then bowed respectfully toward the circular cauldron. Bloodline of Patriarch Han, according to the ancient agreement, the bloodline remains. Patriarch, please return. As the phantoms spoke, they entered the violet qi. At the same time, the statue of the Han clan patriarch stretched out its palm and pressed it against the cauldron. The instant the figures entered the violet qi and the statue pressed on the cauldron, it vibrated, emitting a droning sound that shook everything. Amidst the roaring, the phantom figures began to burn. As for the statue, it trembled violently. Starting at its feet, cracks spread across its entire body. Suddenly, it began to collapse into pieces. From this day forward, there would no longer be 9 statues in this place, but 8. Han Bei shook as if some invisible power were rocking her. She took a few steps back and then spit up some blood. At the same time, a violet glow flew out from the crumbling statue. Meng Hao could clearly see the excitement which appeared in her eyes. Within the violet glow appeared to be a small, sleeping person. It suddenly shot toward Han Bei, hitting her between the eyebrows and merging into her. That's what she came for, thought Meng Hao, his eyes narrowing. At the same time, because of the sacrifice of the 10 Han clan phantoms, the 3 jade pages within the violet qi freed themselves from the circular cauldron and flew out. As they did, a sound like a sigh could be heard from the circular cauldron. As the sigh sounded out, one of the flying jade pages suddenly stopped and then spun backward toward the cauldron. The other 2 continued to fly forward. Chapter 164. That Bird's Aura. The spot between Han Bei's eyebrows glowed with a violet light. Panting, she shot into the air after one of the pages. Meng Hao also leaped into the air, moving with as much speed as he could muster after the other page. They flew up simultaneously and in different directions, dodging in and out of the lightning in pursuit of the jade pages. Just as each person was about to lay hands on their respective pages, the meat jelly, which had been observing them this whole time, suddenly sprang into action. Its movement caused Meng Hao's expression to flicker and Han Bei's face to fall. Both of them were filled with fear. The object itself wasn't dangerous, but it seemed to enjoy jumping onto people's heads, and then consuming lightning. In other words, its arrival heralded the onslaught of a sea of lightning. "Damn it," said Meng Hao, his eyes narrowing when he saw the meat jelly heading toward him. Han Bei, who was moving in a different direction, breathed a sigh of relief. Keeping his eye on the meat jelly, Meng Hao grabbed the jade page and then shot backward as fast as possible. He caused the lightning mist to withdraw. It might be an effective tool to threaten others in this place, but would only serve to attract the meat jelly, and thus, more lightning. Unfortunately, it seemed he had acted too slowly. He shot backward as fast as possible, but the meat jelly was clearly very persistent. In a flash, it was in front of Meng Hao. It shot downward, and appeared to be just about to land on Meng Hao's head. Before it did, and before Meng Hao could even do anything, the meat jelly suddenly trembled. The face of the old man appeared on its surface once again. His eyes were wide open, and his expression was one of both disbelief and disgust. Suddenly, it opened its mouth and spoke. "Damn it! Damn it! How come you have that damn bird's aura on you?" It hopped backward through the air as if it was completely disgusted with Meng Hao and wouldn't even come near him. It flew back up and then suddenly vomited, as if it had just seen something so disgusting it was painful. If that were all, then it wouldn't be a big deal. But then a flash of light could be seen as the meat jelly suddenly appeared in front of Han Bei. She watched in shock as it gulped down the jade paper in a single bite. It started to chew, and when she saw this, Han Bei's scalp grew numb. She could do nothing but move backward. "Gross, gross, gross," said the face on the meat jelly, its expression twisted as it looked over at Meng Hao. It looked as if it was scared to even get close to him. Meng Hao had a strange expression on his face as he looked at the retreating meat jelly. He glanced at horrified Han Bei. She was silent for a moment, and then said, "Congratulations on acquiring the time-refining technique of the Han clan, fellow Daoist Meng. There are 3 jade pieces in total, but each page has a technique that can be used by itself." A complicated look appeared in her eye. Suddenly, the lightning in the area began to roar. It rapidly increased in intensity, each and every bolt brimming with the fierce intensity it had at the beginning. The hour time period had passed. As of now, a lack of lightning-repelling objects equated to certain death and transformation into flying ash. The sheets of lightning made Meng Hao's expression fall. Han Bei also looked shocked. "You acquired the object, so it's yours, Brother Meng," said Han Bei hurriedly. "I will lay no claim to it. But I must ask you to take care for it well. Please do not lose it. Next time we meet, you must give me a copy. That was our agreement." As soon as the words were out of her mouth, she slapped her bag of holding. A violet feng shui compass appeared in her hands. It flashed, and then her body disappeared as she was teleported away. In that same instant, however, the meat jelly shot forward, borrowing some of the teleportation power to also leave the world of the cauldron. Meng Hao looked around at the vast fields of lightning, and then immediately pulled out the violet feng shui compass, which he had examined closely earlier. He poured spiritual sense into it, activating its teleportation power. In an instant, he was teleported away from the world of lightning. When he reappeared, the sky above was dark, and the earth was trembling. Booms echoed out everywhere, and his Dao pillars were instantly unstable. He immediately coughed up a mouthful of blood and staggered forward a few paces. He looked around. He was in the wide plain, not far from the place where he had met up with Han Bei initially. He took a deep breath. Han Bei hadn't been lying. The feng shui compass did what she said it would. He lifted his hand, within which was the good luck charm. He was just about to pour some spiritual sense into it and leave this bizarre blessed land, when suddenly a massive tower began to rise up from the earth off in the distance. Everything shook, and roaring filled the air. He could see that this pillar was like a tower, and it emanated an aura. The aura was not that of core formation or the nascent soul stage, but a foundation establishment. This was the 100 Spirits Tower, constructed with the Dao pillars of over 200 foundation establishment cultivators. Meng Hao sucked in a deep breath when he saw the 100 Spirits Tower. Surrounding the tower were phantom figures of hundreds of cultivators. They emitted shrill howls which merged together into a powerful sound of grievance. The sound rose up into the heavens, causing everything to be dark. From various directions, 10 or so freshly acquired Dao pillars flew through the air toward the tower and melded into it. The power spreading from the tower grew even more intense. "I suppose the rest of the rogue foundation establishment cultivators who came here are all dead." He was silent, struck by the extent of the Black Civ sect's plotting. His Dao pillars trembled inside of him. Were they not perfect Dao pillars, he wouldn't be able to keep them under control. "I can't stay here any longer," he thought. However, it was at this time that he cocked his head and stared off into the distance. His eyes glittered slightly, and he decided not to leave. Instead, he flew up and off into the distance. He flew for the space of about 10 breaths before stopping. There below him in the plain, he saw a group of 4 cultivators sitting cross-legged in meditation. Around them circled a protective spell which seemed to be resisting the power of the 100 Spirits Tower. One of them was none other than Lu Dao. Meng Hao watched on as one of the 4 people coughed up some blood. His body suddenly exploded, and an illusory Dao pillar flew out of him off into the sky. After that, another cultivator began to tremble. His eyes snapped open and he stared at Lu Dao. He laughed bitterly. "You despicable." Before he could finish, his body was torn to pieces as his Dao pillar flew out. The third person's face grew pale as his body also was torn to shreds. His Dao pillar flew off into the distance. However, the death of these 3 people made the protective spell many times stronger than it had been just now. Lu Dao sat inside Paleface, gritting his teeth with dogged will. The power of this spell was the only thing resisting the gravitational force outside. Meng Hao looked down. He could see clearly that the 3 cultivators had been under Lu Dao's control. In reality, their Dao pillars had been blood sacrifices to protect Lu Dao. Their deaths had simply bolstered his spell. Meng Hao, his face placid, descended toward Lu Dao. He landed next to the spell, looked down at Lu Dao, and gave a dry cough. Lu Dao began to tremble. When he opened his eyes and gazed upon Meng Hao, a look of shock covered his face. "So, it's fellow Daoist Meng." His face was pale, his voice anxious as he looked at Meng Hao. "Nice spell," said Meng Hao coolly. He spoke neither quickly nor slowly, but his words caused Lu Dao to feel extremely alarmed. From his perspective, it seemed that Meng Hao wasn't being affected at all by the gravitational force. "Fellow Daoist Meng, what do you want?" His heart was filled with deep anxiety. If Meng Hao interfered with the spell, then it would be broken. He could imagine what the gravitational force would do to him after that. His body would shatter and his Dao pillars would fly into the sky to join all the others in the enormous tower. "Tell me what the thunderclap leaf really does," he said calmly, looking at Lu Dao within the spell. "I already told you, fellow Daoist Meng," he blurted, growing even more nervous. "The thunderclap leaf." Before he could continue, Meng Hao reached out and pushed down on the spell circulating around Lu Dao. As he did, the spell trembled, and a small crack appeared on its surface. Terror flashed onto Lu Dao's face. "Stop, fellow Daoist Meng, please. I'm not deceiving you. The thunderclap leaf really can." Meng Hao gave a cold snort and then pushed down again. A boom sounded out, and 7 or 8 more cracks appeared within the spell. Lu Dao could suddenly feel even more of the gravitational force that existed in the outside world seeping inside. His Dao pillar trembled unstably. His scalp went numb. He was currently scared out of his wits. "Thunderclap leaves are rare in the southern domain," he gushed, talking as fast as he possibly could. "Special techniques exist which can imbue them into magical items to increase their lightning power. Fellow Daoist Meng, listen to me. I have a jade slip here as evidence. Just read the technique in the jade slip and you'll receive enlightenment." He produced a jade slip which he showed to Meng Hao. His entire body trembled, and a look of entreaty appeared on his face. His words sounded sincere, as if he weren't concealing anything. "Still trying to fool me?" A cold light gleamed in Meng Hao's eye. His right index finger stabbed into the spell. A boom rippled out as more cracks filled the spell. There was even a wide hole in one place. The gravitational force poured in. Lu Dao's face twisted and he coughed up some blood. It looked as if his body would explode at any moment. Chapter 165. Civnet Thunder Tree. "Stop!" shrieked Lu Dao, terror-stricken. His face completely drained of blood, and he felt as if the shadow of death were looming over him. He clearly remembered the scene when he had entered this blessed land, how so many cultivators had exploded, their Dao pillars sucked away. He was from the Blacklands, and knew a secret method that he had been able to utilize to stay safe. But with Meng Hao here, he felt an incredible pressure weighing down upon him that he had never felt before. Furthermore, It seemed that no matter what he said, Meng Hao wouldn't believe him. Meng Hao completely had the upper hand. Faced with such life-or-death danger, Lu Dao's schemes disappeared like ash into the wind. "I'm telling the truth," said Lu Dao pleadingly. "Thunderclap leaves can be absorbed into magical treasures to imbue them with the power of lightning. Why don't you believe me?" His voice was hoarse, and from the look on his face, he had been pushed to the limit and had nothing more he could say. His eyes suddenly seemed to flash with understanding. He gave a hoarse laugh, and his eyes filled with boldness born of desperation. "I get it. It's not that you don't believe me, it's that you want to kill me. Fine. Just shatter my spell, then. I, Lu, have already explained the thunderclap leaf's usage. If you're going to kill me, then just kill me. But you can forget about getting the information from my jade slip." Gritting his teeth, Lu Dao pushed down hard on the jade slip. If Meng Hao was really going to destroy the spell, then he would crush it to make sure the fish died and the net was torn. Everyone would lose. Meng Hao looked calmly at Lu Dao. Some time passed, and then he sighed. He lifted his hand and pushed down again. A boom sounded out. What was destroyed, however, was not the spell, but rather the jade slip in Lu Dao's hand. Meng Hao destroyed it, transforming it into pieces of ash. This caused Lu Dao's face to fall and his heart to grow cold. Obviously, this action on the part of Meng Hao indicated that he didn't believe him. "Tell me, or don't tell me. I'm out of patience," he said coolly. It's not that he didn't believe what Lu Dao said about the thunderclap leaves being able to imbue magical treasures with the power of lightning. But Lu Dao spoke his words too easily. They might be true, but Meng Hao couldn't imagine that the thunderclap leaves collected by Patriarch Reliance would be so simple. A bitter smile appeared on Lu Dao's face, as if he had nothing left to say. Meng Hao nodded slightly, then began to press down onto the spell. This time, he would completely destroy it. "I'll tell." Lu Dao's body was trembling, and his heart nearly collapsed into pieces. The shaking of his Dao pillar turned into a look of resolve in his eyes, and a bitter smile on his lips. "I'll tell you," he said, quivering. "But you have to swear that after I tell you, you won't do anything to damage my spell." He smiled a painful smile. Everything he had said before was filled with half-truths, and yet, none of it even touched on the real truth, the most important part. Facing up against death the way he was now, however, he had no choice but to be honest. "Speak," said Meng Hao, his expression the same as ever, but his eyes shining mysteriously. Lu Dao took a deep breath, and was silent for just a moment. Then, with a pained look, he slowly began to speak. "Thunderclap leaves come from the thunderclap tree. But the thunderclap tree's real name is Sivnet Thunder, or mulberry thunder tree." Meng Hao's expression was placid, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. He looked coolly at Lu Dao. This in turn caused indescribable terror to fill Lu Dao's heart. His anguished expression grew stronger, and the coldness within him completely encompassed his heart and filled his body. He began to tremble with fear. There's a legend about the mulberry thunder tree. According to this legend, in ancient times there was an almighty being who achieved enlightenment while sitting underneath a Sivnet thunder tree. Heavenly tribulation descended, desiring to wipe out this new Tao. The will of the lightning infected the tree. As for the almighty being, it split apart the tribulation lightning and then stepped into the stars. Though the almighty being departed, the Sivnet thunder tree absorbed some of its Tao in addition to the power of the tribulation lightning. It was destroyed, and yet, 1,000 years later, a sprout appeared within the dead trunk. Thus was born a tree that was mulberry, but not mulberry. Thunder, but not thunder. A Sivnet mulberry thunder tree. Meng Hao's eyes glittered as he listened to Lu Dao, but he said nothing. In regards to the almighty being which achieved enlightenment underneath the Sivnet mulberry thunder tree, what he said that day beneath the tree was that if he could not achieve ultimate supremacy, he would rather his body be shattered, and stay underneath the tree for all eternity. Lu Dao lowered his head as he spoke, hiding the stubbornness which shone in his eyes. A strange expression appeared on Meng Hao's face as he listened to the story. It seemed to him unlikely that Lu Dao was making this story up as he went. Countless ages have passed since the Sivnet mulberry thunder tree appeared. Eventually, it became part of the heart of the earth, which then caused more trees to sprout. Yet, they contained the experiences from events in ancient times. Because the will of the heavens evolved, this tree was eventually able to cast off that which withered it. Today, it is as precious as phoenix feathers and Chilean horns. Lu Dao was silent for a moment before continuing. Most cultivators will use the tree to meld it with magical items, or even absorb it into their Dao pillars, acquiring the invincible thunder which exists within the sieve net mulberry thunderleaf. However, in the Blacklands, there is a type of lava called frigid snow, which exists in the snowstorms of midwinter. Of all the remarkable bugs in the world, it is ranked number 97. It's a remarkable lava. It doesn't produce silk, but rather intense coldness. It is quite prized by cultivators, and if it can be acquired, is viewed as a precious treasure. It can be refined into a frigid spirit, embodied into a frigid treasure. This lava is not common, but not exceedingly rare, and occasionally appears. At this point, Lu Dao paused for a moment and looked at Meng Hao. Meng Hao looked back at him, and their gazes locked for a moment. Lu Dao sighed inwardly, and then continued. What only a few people know, however, is that there is an unusual relationship between the lava and the sieve net thunder mulberry tree. If the lava consumes the leaves of the tree, it is possible for it to become the number 4 ranked remarkable bug, the eyeless lava. The eyeless lava turns into a chrysalis, and will produce a thread of silk. That thread cannot be broken, nor can the body be destroyed. The body cannot be destroyed, and the thread cannot be broken. It creates an unstoppable cycle. The thread becomes an invincible precious treasure. The eyeless lava has only appeared twice throughout history, and each time, the thread it produced caused a sensation in the cultivation world. There was even conflict in the eastern lands. To this very day, no one knows what caused the death of the eyeless larvae that appeared twice before. Lu Dao sighed inwardly. Having finished speaking, he looked deeply at Meng Hao, then closed his eyes. Meng Hao muttered to himself as he looked at closed-eyed Lu Dao. Finally, he laughed. Turning, his body transformed into a prismatic beam which shot off into the distance. After Meng Hao left, Lu Dao opened his eyes. He looked blankly up at the sky, then let out a long sigh. Soon, his eyes filled with a cold glow. Everything I said now was 90% true and 10% false. That guy might buy smart, but he'll have a hard time telling which is which. He'll definitely go looking for the frigid snow lava. If he really does feed it the sieve net thunder mulberry leaf, then he's dead. All I have to do now is endure this pain a bit longer until the black sieve sect finishes. Then I'll be able to find some clues in this place to find what I'm looking for. A grim look on his face, he took a deep breath, and then closed his eyes to begin repairing his spell. Meng Hao was lost in thought as he flew through the air. Of course he wouldn't believe everything that Lu Dao told him. However, he was fairly certain that at least some of what he'd said was true. It would have been too difficult to simply make up such a story on the spot. Perhaps half was true and half were lies. With desire comes incompleteness. If I have no desire, then the storms will not touch me. Meng Hao smiled as he continued onward. Everything he passed was completely barren. He didn't see even one rogue Foundation establishment cultivator. Up ahead, the 100 Spirits Tower emitted a bright glow which surrounded everything. From such a distance, Meng Hao was unable to spot Xu Qing amongst the crowd. He silently took out the good luck charm and poured some spiritual energy into it. Immediately, he felt the teleportation power. However, he couldn't teleport immediately. It would require some time before the power could be activated. Meng Hao took a deep breath and then shot toward the peak of a nearby mountain. He sat down cross-legged. Ignoring what was happening around him, he continued to pour spiritual energy into the good luck charm, feeling the teleportation power growing in intensity. I need to wait for the time it takes half an incense stick to burn. This was his first time using the good luck charm, so it was also his first time encountering its downside. His current location wasn't exactly safe, but there were no people around, only the glow emanating from the 100 Spirits Tower. However, his perfect foundation was still capable of resisting it. If too much time passed, though, it would become more difficult to fight back. Therefore, he concentrated fully on the good luck charm. I wonder where I'll be teleported to. His eyes flickered as he felt the teleportation power surging. He placed his right hand on the ground. The dirt began to churn, and tentacles burst up out of the soil. They transformed into a violet golden fruit the size of a palm. Meng Hao closed his fingers over it and then placed it into his bag of the cosmos. It was at this moment that suddenly, something flickered in the air near the 100 Spirits Tower. It wasn't large, but Meng Hao immediately recognized it. It was none other than what he and Han Bei had encountered before teleporting out of the square cauldron, the meat jelly. It floated in midair, its archaic features gazing curiously at the 100 Spirits Tower. Suddenly, it emitted a piercing howl which filled heaven and earth. The wind and clouds surged, and the ground shook. Even the 100 Spirits Tower trembled as if it might collapse. The hundreds of phantoms which circled around all began to shriek. Lightning began to build up on their bodies. Surrounding the tower at its base were nearly 1,000 Black Civ sect disciples, all sitting cross-legged. In the forefront were 8 core formation cultivators. As soon as the meat jelly appeared and the clouds whipped into a frenzy, their eyes opened, and they looked up into the sky. It's appeared. That thing is ultimate vexation. Their eyes filled with excitement, and their hearts pounded as their hands flickered incantations. Immediately, the ground in front of them began to glow, and suddenly Patriarch Violet Civ and the beautiful middle-aged woman appeared. Nascent soul cultivators. So, it was fished out. I shall acquire this item today, cried Patriarch Violet Civ. His eyes were fixed on the meat jelly and they shined with intense expectation.